Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's Liam here from Biggerplate.com. Delighted to be joined today by a very old friend of Biggerplate, someone who's been in the mind mapping space as long, but I actually think even longer than we have, Chuck Frey. Chuck runs the mindmappingsoftwareblog.com, which I'm sure most, if not all of you, will be familiar with as in our view, the leading sort of independent blog on mind mapping and mind mapping software. Delighted to have Chuck with us today from his home in, I'm going to get it wrong again, Milwaukee.
Waterford, Wisconsin, near Milwaukee.
It's near, I confused the two again. So I've got Chuck here today just to really have a little bit of a chat about the world we both occupy in terms of the mind mapping space. Really interested to get Chuck's views on almost the past, present and future of the mind mapping world. But the prompt, Chuck, for us to kind of reconnect for a call here was around your new version of your F.A.S.T Framework. Now, you did a really great webinar for our pro members a few months back about version 1 of the framework. So I thought, just by way of an intro, if you like, maybe you could just give us a little bit of what is the F.A.S.T framework for mind mapping, who's it sort of catering for or trying to help, and why do people maybe need it or need a framework for mind mapping? So first of all, Chuck, thanks for coming on and having a chat with me, but maybe starting off with the F.A.S.T framework, and then maybe we'll go back in time about where we've got to bring ourselves up to here.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity, Liam. I created the F.A.S.T framework because, I've been covering this space for 14 years now. It doesn't seem like it should be that long, but it is. I saw that a lot of people were getting started with mind mapping software. The uptake of people using it is well in the millions worldwide, but I sensed that a lot of people got to the point where they're able to do basic brainstorming and arranging of ideas and maybe planning some simple projects and things with it, but then they just kind of stopped there. And I was always looking for a way to help people go further, because I'm super impressed with all the things it makes possible. The feature set of today's mind mapping software is amazing. I mean, it literally lets you create a visual database, if you will, for your projects. As a front-end planning tool, it's peerless. I mean, if you go beyond brainstorming to managing a lot of the types of things that knowledge workers need to be able to do today, as far as gathering, distilling, organizing, and sharing information, it's incredible. And I wanted to help people reach that potential. And I had done several e-courses over the years and got limited interest from them. And more recently, in the last year, I came across the whole idea of a framework, a process. And I wondered if you brought a process orientation to building mind maps, if that would help. Certainly, if you're just playing around in the area of brainstorming, you don't need much structure. In fact, it's an advantage to just let your thinking go where it may and capture all that in a mind map. But for a lot of business tasks, process orientation, I thought, would help. So I published a book last year about the F.A.S.T framework, version 1.0, if you will, and that got pretty good reception. And I was looking to take it to the next level. So I actually put it out to my readers and said, here it is, grab it for free, under the condition that you give me feedback. I want to make it better. I want to make it work harder for you. The response was off the charts. I got such great advice back. And then when I did the Biggerplate webinar earlier this year, that gave me another opportunity to get feedback and see what people were responding to. And I built that all into an online course version of it that is much enhanced. So I wanted to provide people with a process. We're all facing a lot of challenges today, probably even more than normal because of the circumstances we're in globally right now. And we need to make full use of our brains. We've got such a marvelous tool between our ears. And part of that is being able to use the tools that we have at our disposal as best as we can to help us develop and put those ideas out into the world. And that's been my focus right along. So this is the latest iteration of that. And I believe if you get a bigger toolkit to draw from, you've got new paths and possibilities that allow you to sidestep challenges and roadblocks and actually get more done. And as I said, get your ideas out in the world. So it's a simple 4-step process that enhances your ability to think and plan. And if you're sharing mind maps with other people, to communicate those with greater clarity. So that's in a nutshell.
And F.A.S.T stands for F.A.S.T. What are your 4 headings there? Just remind me of that.
The F is for foundation. That's how to create the right first level topics. So you've got a solid foundation to build upon, if you will. A is associate, using your brain's associative capability in the best ways possible to build out the content of your mind map. And then once you've built it up, the third step is synthesis or sense making, where you step back and consider what you've created in your map, what can be combined or enhanced, what needs to be added, really refining the structure and optimizing it. And then T is transform, where you use some of the more advanced tools of your mind mapping software to add more value to your map, help it to communicate more clearly, add context to the things that need it, and really make it a hard-working finished product, whether it's for yourself or sharing with others.
And you said that so you're on version 2 now. What was sort of the steering that you got when you got that feedback from version 1? What was the sort of what's changed from version 1 to version 2 that you've then built into this online course that people can get stuck into? What was the sort of the key drivers that you said, I need a version 2 before I build the course?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was the first version was somewhat theoretical, and it was my best guess at what people needed. And so once I got the feedback, that allowed me to fine tune that. And in particular, I took an example of a marketing plan mind map and just built it up through each of the 4 stages so people could see the principles that I talked about in the lessons actually put it to use in a real setting. It was actually a mind map that I was creating for a freelance client of mine. So
yeah, I think that it really speaks to, I guess, one of the key issues that I'm interested to get your thoughts on more broadly is user adoption of mind mapping is a challenge we know has been sort of from day one. Is people don't quite know where to use this stuff. They don't quite know where it fits. And at Biggerplate, we've always been very focused on trying to, I think, do sort of what you're talking about, which is show the practical, where am I going to use this? So I guess to put it into a process or a project that feels familiar is going to give it that extra kind of understandable reference point for people as they look at the content. So if I'm a marketer, I can see a marketing plan has now been put together into this slightly different format. I'm going to hopefully understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, and one of the things that I added, for example, in the foundation part of the course was looking at, I think, 5 or 6 different types of mind maps, some business-oriented, some not, to say, okay, if you're creating this type of a map, these are some of the first-level topics you might want to consider starting out with to build that solid foundation.
Yeah. Perfect. So I think the F.A.S.T Framework is sort of ironically fast forwarding to today and where you've got to, but it's not often enough that you and I get to kind of catch up and compare notes. But I thought for the benefit of those who maybe don't know, if you like, the history that's brought you to this point, I would be interested to just, in your words, get a little bit of a sense. You've been operating in this space for a long time. I think you said 14 years. So I think you're ahead of us by a couple of years, which not that many people are. And I'm interested to know and to share with others, where did the interest in mind mapping tools begin? What was that spark 14 years ago? What sort of led you down this road that's 14 years later still occupying a lot of your time and your mind?
The spark actually happened about 20 years ago. I had a great deal of interest as an avocation in creativity and innovation. And I realized at that point, this was 1990. It was 2000, I'm sorry, 20 years ago. I realized that there wasn't a portal or website focused on business innovation that gathered together all the best thinking in one place. So I created one, innovationtools.com. And as part of the tools that I was covering in that space, I'd been aware of mind mapping and mind mapping software and was always really fascinated by the utility of it, the ability to capture and arrange your ideas and enhance them. I just love that. And I started to see that gaining traction and popularity among business people and other users. But I realized that there wasn't a blog devoted to it. So I decided to break that part of it off 14 years ago and make it its own freestanding blog, and with a mission of educating and informing and providing valuable tips and strategies to use it most effectively.
I would always, I've said to you many times, but your blog was one of the first resources I remember discovering when we said, I've got this idea for a mind map library. What else is out there? And I remember in terms of that particular time, which was 2006, your blog being one of the first things I found. I was like, oh, someone is talking about this stuff, and someone is actually sharing what's going on and how's it going. How did you know? You're still doing it 14 years later. So at some point you must have sort of just got a feeling or some feedback that says, I'm kind of onto a topic here that's of interest and that's getting attention. Were there any sort of obvious early signs that you kind of said, okay, I'm on something interesting here?
I started getting some early feedback from readers of it. And, I kind of let my own passion drive it initially. And then as I talked to users of mind mapping softwares and the developers and understood some of the challenges they were facing, getting acceptance and use of it and understanding of it, I kind of wove that into the content of the blog.
And then at some point in that journey, you built your insider membership, which is a sort of an upgraded membership to get access to maybe some of your more in-depth work, the reports and some of the research things you've done. When did that sort of get layered into the site? Or was that there from day one?
That was maybe about 8-10 years ago. I added that as another tier of premium content.
And so you've always had this very engaged, well, I don't know about always, but certainly in all the time I've known about it, you seem to have had this very engaged community of readers and people that give you lots of feedback. So when you put out your surveys or when you ask for feedback on your F.A.S.T framework, it seems like you're really able to get a lot of genuine sort of interest and feedback in those things. So have some of those people sort of been on this journey with you the whole time? You've got probably some people in there who you've known for many years, I assume.
Yeah, it's certainly, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Liam, is that there's some passionate, true believers in it who make it a big part of their work. They spend a lot of time living in it as part of their work and thinking and planning and executing projects, which a lot of people frankly don't do. They use it occasionally when they need to, but they've been great supporters and they help me to be able to see what parts I'm missing. And, frankly, at this point in the journey, one of my problems is getting back to beginner's mind, trying to appeal to the broader audience and say, you're facing these challenges in your work, in your life. This is a tool that you really ought to consider to help you with them because it does a lot of things elegantly that people need help with.
Yeah, so. I think that you put it very well. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it that way, but when you have been in a space that is quite niche and quite specialist for so long, you sort of forget how simple some of the initial questions are. I actually had this week. I've done 4 days worth of training with a client, and I'm amazed that these people are seeing mind mapping software for the first time. Even that for me is amazing in 2020 when I started Biggerplate in 2008. So we've been on a long journey, and I guess I'm interested in that regard. If you think about that long journey on your side, what if you zoom out in terms of the broader mind mapping software space, what do you kind of see as maybe some of the biggest things that have changed or maybe not changed enough in this kind of space that we're occupying and interested in together?
Well, one of the biggest trends I've seen is that the developers are adding more tools to their tool sets, like Kanban views and root cause analysis diagrams and that sort of thing, and just the combination of diagramming and mind mapping. And mind maps are very powerful, but they're not the solution to every problem. When you go to the hammer, you view everything as a nail. That might be the optimum solution for certain things, especially problems that are more process oriented. And so that's been an interesting development, and I've tried to evolve the blog over that time to incorporate that. So I'm focusing broadly on visual thinking tools, and there's some really cool things going on in terms of collaboration tools and like the whole Kanban movement, which turns out to be a very elegant way to classify a large volume of topics and information very quickly. Rather than moving around individual topics within a mind map, you could just slide them into these columns and then go back to the mind map view. So, yeah,
that combination has certainly seemed to got a bit of traction in the last few years, doesn't it? The mind mapping and Kanban, there are some. I think you've probably, like me, you've seen at times people, the software developers at times have done it. They've sort of bolted things onto or near mind mapping that don't actually fit that naturally. And other times they've come up with these ideas that really do seem to fit together very neatly. And I think mind mapping and Kanban is one of those things that actually there is a pretty natural marriage there. And it's not, as you said earlier, it's not everything needs to be done in a mind map. You used the phrase upfront planning, I think you said earlier.
Process type things, yeah.
And you think, if you think about your mind map, it's just as important when to switch out of your mind map as it is, when you switch into your mind map. So I think that I see that trend as well, and I'm interested to get your view as well. We've seen over the last few years, the tools that started life as mind mapping products have started to add things on, as you say. On the other side, there's also a sort of other range of tools that didn't start life as mind mapping and are now adding mind mapping into their suite. I'm thinking of the likes of sort of Miro and these kind of tools. What's your kind of take on this kind of mind mapping coming at it from the other end? You've got tools that are now building in. Mind mapping is not the core; it's just a component of a set. What's your kind of take? Where do you see that heading as a trend?
Well, I think broadly speaking, whether you're talking about mind mapping tools or diagramming tools or these visual collaboration tools like Miro and Mural, there's some featureitis going on. By that I mean everybody wants to one-up their competitors and try and serve a broader set of the needs of their users. But at some point you end up with a tool that's so complex, or like you said, you've probably seen this, I know I have, where a developer releases a new version with some brand new capability, and it just leaves me kind of scratching my head like, what? People actually need to be able to do this.
Yeah, that's a use case.
But I think to a certain extent, they're putting things out there to see what the reaction is, and I give them respect for that, and they keep the things that are useful, and they kind of deep six the things that aren't.
Yeah.
So it's an evolving tool set.
And if you were, I guess, reflecting on the trends and what you've seen in the sort of years you've been running the blog now, what do you think maybe we have not collectively made enough progress on? And I say we because it's very easy to kind of say, well, the software developers haven't done this, they haven't done that.
Right,
they've overlooked this, they've overlooked that. But if you just sort of thought in broader terms, practitioners, users, advocates, experts, trainers, consultants, and the software developers who are sort of advocating for these tools and techniques, where do you think maybe we haven't made enough progress? To put you on the spot.
Well, I think it's not something anybody really has any control over, but just the amount of things that are written about mind mapping. One of my pet peeves, and I've talked about this on the blog, is somebody who goes and does a Google search and finds the top 10 or 12 visual thinking tools and puts them into a listicle article, and half of them aren't even mind mapping software. So it just breeds so much confusion about what mind mapping actually is and what it isn't.
Yeah. I agree with you. It's certainly, I think you and I have probably had this conversation in the past. I think it is actually one of the most annoyingly detrimental things to the really good developers who are creating good products that are improving all the time. Is I've seen one even in 2020, best mind mapping software available, and not only are some of the apps or software they're listing not really mind mapping tools, some of them aren't even still actively being developed. It's someone who's just done a pretty low level Google search. It's not even a good quality Google search, and it's pretty poor, and I know from our relationships with many of the software companies, they find it infuriating, and I sort of feel for them really, because it does just sort of detract from the really good stuff that exists. It's kind of noise in the marketplace, I guess.
I guess the one thing that as a niche that we're still struggling with is how to help people leap the chasm who aren't users of it and who don't understand the value of it. And I've been working on that, and to a certain extent. That's what the F.A.S.T Framework is aimed at. Primarily, it's aimed at people who have got the software, have gotten started with it, and have hit the wall.
Yeah.
But my hope is that I can make it appeal somewhat to the people who are on the fence, who've heard of it, who think it might be useful, who are concerned that the learning curve might be just a little too high, because it does have its own lingo and its own approaches to things that you kind of need to understand to get the most out of it. So to the extent that I can demystify that and help them get over that hump, that's part of my mission right now too.
Yeah, and I think it is the mission. I think it's the mission I think that sort of would be most beneficial. It's certainly the mission we're aligned with alongside with you is people get these tools and they either are introduced to it through a very narrow door. So somebody says to them, hey, mind mapping is really good for this specific thing. And it means they maybe are not aware of the many, many broader uses for it. Or the opposite happens. They almost get bombarded with someone who's so enthusiastic that person gives them the impression that it can do everything, which is actually not very helpful as a where do I get started sort of position. Right. So somewhere in the middle is kind of where we need to be, is saying, right, you've got these great tools at your disposal. Here are some suggestions that are, and ideally, for us at Biggerplate, we're focusing a lot on, well, what do you do? If we know what you do, what's your job, what's your challenge, then we say, okay, here's a use case that may be relevant for you. Here's a webinar, here's a mind map template, or here's a blog post. We need to probably know a little bit more about what people think they're going to try and use it for in order to sort of serve back useful guidance, I guess.
Yeah, I use the analogy of the blank page problem that you have with word processing. It's exactly the same thing in a visual format. I've got a central topic here and it's staring at me with all this white space around it. What do I do now? Yeah. I could create a lot of different things if I only knew what was possible.
Yeah. And I guess that's where that very empowering tool suddenly starts to become quite intimidating. And if you don't feel you've cracked it, you put it down and you kind of forget about it.
Exactly.
I certainly think there will be some software vendors sort of nodding their heads and saying, yeah, that's the problem. Because when we go to sell the upgrade version the next year or the year after, people say, we're not really using it. So I think that is sort of almost the universal problem that we've got to try and crack a little bit better on, I think.
Yes.
And if I just sort of pick your brains a little bit more, I'm interested in where do you see, if I ask you the sort of future gaze for a moment, having been in this for a long time and sort of where you're at now, focusing very much on trying to help people with those early stages and that user adoption challenge, where do you kind of see maybe the opportunities or the risks if we were sort of looking forward in terms of mind mapping software tools? I'm interested in your view on where maybe we might see some breakthroughs or we may actually see mind mapping maybe struggling for traction for some reason.
I'm going to focus on the high end of things. The connection between AI and mind mapping software, I think, has some real fascinating possibilities. I actually put out a report maybe 2 years ago about that. And what really got me going on it is there's a researcher in South America who was using IBM Watson's, their AI engine, to pour through tens of thousands of medical journals and then do semantic analysis of the contents of all those articles, millions of words, and then use the mind map to display them in meaningful ways, kind of slicing and dicing across all that knowledge in different ways. And based on which branch you go down, you get a different interpretation of it. So that sort of large-scale knowledge management and knowledge mining, if you will, I think has got some real potential. And even if you're using it as a brainstorming tool, I mean, I think there's ample possibility as you're adding a topic to a branch of a mind map and you're brainstorming ideas. What if the tool had some sort of an intelligent AI agent built into it that's suggested things to you that you might want to add to your map?
And maybe things that are a little off-piste, a little, it's a different engine working than your own brain, which will maybe trigger some unusual associations that you wouldn't have come up with. Yeah. And someone once described this to me. It was a software developer who shall remain nameless, but they talked about this idea of a sort of mind map that almost suggests and builds itself based on whatever you put in there. And he said, I kind of like the novelty of it, but he said, I think it could be a bit like asking your GPS where to go. Right. I quite like that that as an analogy. But I think somewhere in there, as you suggest, is something that, is I guess a feature, if you like, or a function or a capability that says, I want to kind of take myself off in places that I won't come up with and maybe get some prompts that are contextually a bit different. And that's kind of an interesting one. And what about maybe the flip side? Where are maybe some threats to the market? Do you see, for example, any issue with, as I've seen over I think even the last 5 years, there seems to be an almost continuous influx of new mind mapping tools. Now, I view that as a positive thing. Lots of them are bringing quite innovative things to market. There are also a lot of just kind of copycat products that aren't really very different. do you see any problem with this sort of ballooning of products, or do you think there's going to be a sort of writing of things as we go forward?
I think just natural market forces are causing it to write itself over time. Even at the very beginning, I looked at this space and said, there's too many tools chasing not enough potential users. Right. And eventually, some of them fall off the low end. They just aren't able to sustain a business model. And I've seen the space contract a little bit, like MindMaple kind of went away, and iMindMap became Iowa, or however they pronounce it. That became a web-based tool and added more tools to it. So everyone's trying to get their own foothold in this market and try and figure out what people need. Mm. And a lot of the new tools that I see aren't so much coming on the desktop. There's a few more in the web space, but just a continual influx of iPad and Android apps, which is just people playing around with programming. And it's, like you said, mainly basic stuff.
Yeah, and I think this is what is amazing to me as someone who can't do anything technical. It seems like if you have technical skill, it's actually quite easy to knock up a pretty basic sort of mind mapping app. I mean, I don't mean that in a patronizing way at all. I think it's really impressive because I wouldn't even know where to begin. But It seems almost now developers with the skill set can build something relatively basic and put it out there. And again, there is a question in my mind of whether that sort of clutter is helpful or not, but I think from that will come some really interesting new things as well. You touched on an idea there, which I'm interested to just get a view from you as well, is this move to online. So this kind of trend, as we call it here, the sort of the move to cloud and online tools. Do you think this could be one of those market forces which will almost leave some behind, maybe some who don't have the development capacity, the funds, or even the appetite to try and transition into an online subscription type model? Do you see that as maybe being one of these market forces that will see a few get left behind, or do you think they'll just be operating on sort of different planes?
I think there's always going to be a need for desktop software simply because of the way large companies are organized. Their IT departments have a lock on the desktop, and they would prefer not to be sending data outside the walls of the organization. And although that trend is moving more towards the cloud, where it's more accepted than it was a decade ago, I think there's always going to be security concerns. I don't know if it's going to leave people behind. It's interesting to watch how this has all evolved, because in the beginning of the whole web mind mapping movement, if you recall, there were 3 or 4 big players. And as the underlying browser technology moved away from Flash, only one of them really emerged solid. A couple of the others are still hanging on, but they're not getting the kind of traction that MindMeister is getting. So they were willing to make the investment to make that transition. I'm not sure what the next transition is, if it's away from the desktop or there's certainly some people playing around with VR and things like that. I'm not sure if that's just a novelty or not.
Well, it's another one of those things where I'm always interested to find out, and particularly from someone like you who's sort of got such a good long-term and in-depth view of this, is things like VR and AR have been. I've been asked about it quite a lot. Do you think, Liam, we're going to be wearing headsets? And the analogy people always use without fail is Minority Report. I get asked about Minority Report in pretty much every training workshop I ever do. When are we going to be doing this? And I always will come back to the fact, well, if you actually watch what Tom Cruise is doing in Minority Report, he's basically just moving folders around like you would on a desktop. That's not particularly helpful, and that's not mind mapping. Mind mapping is about structure and hierarchy, and it helps you understand all those things. But this idea of kind of heads-up displays, virtual reality, augmented reality, I'm still not sure whether it's going to get beyond novelty, not just in mind mapping, but maybe just in the broader sense for quite some time. So I certainly wouldn't be hanging my hat on that being a big tech influence for a few years to come. I don't know what your view is on that.
Well, I view it very much as a novelty, Liam. I look at everything from a very practical lens. How does it help me see things, see patterns, interpret things in ways that I couldn't before? And certainly when you make the jump from linear information to putting it in a mind map, it reveals all of that and more. Does the leap to VR, to 3D actually help you see any better? I'm not seeing that yet.
No, my personal view of 3D mapping, which is something I get asked about a lot as well, is that hides things. I think the
Yes.
2D nature of a mind map is actually part of its power. It may not be very sexy or exciting, but the fact that everything is theoretically sort of visible on one screen, you don't have this idea of, okay, there's some topics around the corner there that I'm not aware of.
Yes.
I think that's actually getting away from the power of it. So it's very interesting. People get very enthusiastic about the idea of 3D mind mapping and things. But I'm maybe a little bit more practically minded, and I'm very susceptible to novelty and getting overexcited. So I'm trying to rein myself in now a bit more. But
There's a couple of things that got started but never really developed. I don't know why. One of them, I can't think of the name of this. I think it was Spinscape was the name of the tool that was out about maybe 5 to 7 years ago, where it actually integrated a Google search in one panel next to the mind map, where you could actually use it as a research tool. You could do a Google search and the results would show up in the left-hand panel, and you could drag and drop the information you were gathering into your mind map. I thought that was amazing, and it met a real need that people have, because everyone needs to gather and organize and disseminate information.
yeah,
But that tool just kind of went away because the developer couldn't afford to keep it going anymore. In another case, a developer that will go unnamed included a brainstorming mode in their software, but not the typical strip down, enter things fast type brainstorming mode. There was actually a panel on the right-hand side that walked you through a step-by-step brainstorming process. They were just cards, if you will, that were displayed. You could click on one after another and drag and drop things into your map. That kind of user assistance I thought was fantastic, but it just didn't make the cut as it continued to evolve into newer and newer versions. But those kind of things, I think there's a lot of potential there. It still leaves the power with you, the user, but it provides you with aids or triggers to help you do it better.
yeah. I think those brainstorming modes. I think I've seen a lot of brainstorming modes that I'm just a little bit like you said earlier. I'm going, how is this helping me? But there are others, exactly as you say, that can maybe just prompt and just help you structure that process a little bit more. People have such a strong association with mind mapping and brainstorming. It can be a real double-edged sword, because a lot of people go, okay, I've been in a lot of really terrible brainstorms. So if mind map's anything to do with brainstorms, I'm not interested. But actually, the power of it is structuring the unstructured ideas that come out in brainstorms. And I think if the tools could maybe help to support that a little bit, as you say, some of them have, some of them do, some of them don't so usefully. I think that upfront thinking process could be really assisted with that sort of function as well. Yeah. So Chuck, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so I don't eat too much more of your day. So I'm gonna ask you maybe a sort of a final question. Is you've done Mind Mapping Software blog now for 14 years. It's been an invaluable resource for us, for me personally, for many years as well. What is maybe the next era look like for you and for the Mind Mapping Software blog? You've got the F.A.S.T Framework course, which is based on the version 2 framework. That's now live. People can go to mindmappingsoftwareblog.com. They can get that information, access the course. It's fantastic. So you should go and have a look at that. But any other things you can share that you're thinking about working on, any sort of reports or research you're looking at that you can kind of give us a heads up for?
Well, the F.A.S.T Framework course, if you go to the mindmappingsoftwareblog.com/FAST, you can get to that quickly. I just wanted to mention that. And it's going to be continuing to provide training, looking at diving deeper into some of these other tools. Like, I've gotten really fascinated with what I've been able to create in Miro, M-I-R-O, one of these visual collaboration tools. Unlike some of the others, you can actually create your own templates. You can actually build anything you want out of that. And I'm actually intending to put up a video that shows some of the things I'm doing, combining my interest in brainstorming tools and techniques with what their platform enables. And I've been threatening to do a Kanban report as well, helping people to understand what's going on there, because not only are there a few mind mapping programs that offer a Kanban view, there's a whole niche of Kanban software. So
there's a whole area to tap into there.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Chuck, I won't take up any more of your time, but I want to say 2 thank yous. Firstly, a thank you for joining me for just a chat. I think I know a lot of our joint users and members will be interested, hopefully, to hear your perspectives on this. But my second thank you is for the incredible work you've done over 14 years to to sort of feed the knowledge that we're building around mind mapping. I think you have been the sort of center point of that independent knowledge. So I thank you on behalf of all Biggerplate members, because we've probably sent all of them over to you at one stage or another. I always reflect on the fact that when I started Biggerplate, I feel, you may have a different view, I'm not sure, but I feel there was a much more active blogging community about mind mapping. And over the years, I saw that sort of disappear a little bit, which is a shame. But you've always been the sort of steadfast. We'll always direct people over to Chuck to see what he's doing. So thank you for all your work on that. Thank you for joining me for today. For anybody watching, it's very worth mentioning, if you search on Biggerplate, Chuck's name, so search Chuck Frey in the Biggerplate search bar, you'll be able to find the webinars that Chuck has done for us. He did one on the F.A.S.T Framework. He did one on mind mapping and AI. So well worth doing a quick search on Biggerplate and finding the webinars that Chuck has done in the past, as well as a few mind maps as well. So finally from me, thank you to anyone for watching, and thank you once again to Chuck for his time today and for his sterling work. And we look forward to seeing whatever comes next on the mindmappingsoftwareblog.com.
And thank you for your support over the years and for inviting me for this conversation.
No problem. Thanks again, Chuck.